Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and this is Dev Diary number 20 for Victoria 3. Today we have diplomatic actions, very interesting Dev Diary because we will primarily be talking about the idea of what is a diplomatic action, what types are there and how do they work. Now what the exact details are, hey, that is, not really discussed in detail because of course these can change, but primarily I think that is something for their individual Dev Diaries. We are currently looking at Dev Diary number 3, I think. This one is capacities, because influence, which is what you can see right here, is a primary factor in diplomatic actions. That is very important, and I do want to mention before we jump into all of this that if you're interested in the monthly update video, after this Dev Diary is over, in the same video, you can also jump to it already in the timeline. There will be chapters, of course, but basically we will be talking about the screenshots that we have from that video, so, make sure to tune in. So, what do we have here? Why do I care about it? In Victoria 2, we were looking at diplomatic points, and diplomatic points allowed you to take interactions against or towards other countries. That is the way it was. What has to be said is that in Victoria 2, you could not influence the generation rate of diplomatic points at all outside of changing your power status, meaning whether you're a great power, whether you're a secondary power, and so on and so forth. That, forgive me for saying this, dear Victoria 2 enthusiasts, but that's pretty much mana. Because you don't really have any influence, it's generated out of nowhere, it can't be explained, it just works, okay? It just works. And almost all actions were influenced by it. What wasn't influenced by it was actual influence, where you would, the 3 buttons that you could press with how much influence you would focus on it and whatnot. But what was influenced by it is, hey, which actions can you take towards another nation? Now in Victoria 3, we do this via the capacity of influence. You can see it right here. Currently we have a positive balance. Don't worry too much about the details of the numbers here. That is all, of course, day-to-day politics. That is all balancing. It doesn't really matter. But basically, if you have excess influence, which is a capacity, daily reminder, you will get a threat decay. Now, threat is no longer in the game, it's infamy, so I assume it's an infamy decay. Your total generation of influence stems from a base value, so this is, you get guaranteed get 100. Then your power status, you get 500 from being a minor power. 200 from the ruler trait ambitious, meaning your ruler traits can be positive and negative, and then plus 10% from landowner's family ties. That is one of the landowner traits, so an interest group here that supports you directly and basically is giving you this benefit. I like this a lot. There's a lot of influence that you can take here. There's a lot of, options that you have. If you want to expand your diplomatic reach, you will have to satisfy a certain group of people. Family ties make sense. This is a time of monarchies, and having somebody that has family ties makes it easier to make inroads into another country. Now, you are paying here for basically maintaining relationships. That is A, the personal union with Norway, and then B, the improved relations with Prussia. Interesting. And again, while the numbers are not final and you shouldn't care too much about them, I do want to point out, keep it in mind that this is basically how influence interacts with diplomatic actions. And keep in mind that influence very clearly is easier understandable to why it is the way it is, where these numbers come from, and it can be influenced, making it so it's honestly less mana than diplomatic points, just, to go back to the capacity talk there. But, hey, nobody that played Victoria 2 wants to know that diplomatic points are basically mana. But listen, I'm just joking. What I'm saying is, that is what you need to know. Let's jump into diplomatic actions. This is the topic of diplomatic actions, which are the means by which countries in Victoria 3 conduct diplomacy, build or tear down relations, and sign various kinds of agreements with each other. In short, the diplomatic actions is a type of interaction that is carried out by one country towards another, and which sometimes, but not always, requires the agreement of the other party. For example, if you, create any sort of pact, any sort of alliance, that obviously needs approval. If you just increase relations with somebody, they don't need to approve of that, you can just do that. As the exact requirement and effects of a diplomatic action are unique to each type of action, this Dev Diary will mostly just be going over which actions currently exist in the game, but before I get into that, I want to briefly explain about the 3 distinct categories that all actions fall into and how they differ. This is where it gets interesting, keep influence in mind here. Instant actions. These are actions that are carried out immediately upon use and or acceptance if acceptance is needed. They do not cost any influence capacity as they do not require maintenance. A good example here again is very likely declaring war, as stupid as it sounds, but yeah, declaring war, you don't need to maintain that, you don't need to, maybe you do actually need to maintain it, now that I think about it. There could be maintenance that you need to sort of juggle your diplomatic balls outside of this war, and that, the war basically brings your influence down, but I'm not sure that that is the case. Either way, I hope you know what I mean. It's a one-time thing. It's something where you, for example, give somebody a gift. That is a one-time thing. Then we have ongoing actions. These are unilateral actions that are carried out over time by one party towards the other, and can only be cancelled by the first party. They can have an influence maintenance cost, in which case only the first party is the one to pay it, meaning, for example, increasing or damaging relations. Please take note that for this one you do need influence capacity, and I want to set this sort of into the frame of Victoria 2. If you haven't played Victoria 2, don't worry about it. I'm mostly just bashing it. It's what I do, okay? It's what I do. Basically, in Victoria 2, ongoing actions were not really a thing. You had two ongoing actions that come to mind for me. That is generating a CB, and that one is very, very passive. You don't pay anything as you do it, you just pay to do it, and maybe you do pay infamy if you get unlucky during doing it. And then the other one is the increasing opinions, where is it opinion or is it relation? Honestly, I can't even recall. It's the one where you have the 3 buttons and you activate it, you give a sort of a priority to it. That's literally what it's called, and then you can change your status in a one-time and an instant action from, for example, cordial to friendly, friendly to in the sphere, and so on and so forth, right? These are the ongoing actions, and you didn't really pay any ongoing prices. At the very least, I mean, to increase relations, you did have to go on and basically, increase relations with other countries less as your power was split. But most other interactions in Victoria 2 were directly connected to diplomatic actions or diplomatic points, and diplomatic points were generated much without your influence, and primarily, were all handled the same as long as you were a certain power status. You were looking at a situation where at that point, yeah, it was all pretty much straightforward. It was just this is all the same cost effective. It was pretty basic. This changes. Instant actions don't cost capacity, but ongoing actions cost capacity, cost one country capacity. The interesting one here is the third one, and that is pacts. These are bilateral actions that are carried out over time as an agreement between two parties. Both parties have to pay it unless the agreement has a clear senior and junior partner, such as subject relations. For example, I need to pay influence to have a vassal, the vassal doesn't need to pay it. To have an ally, both me and my ally have to pay influence. Both parties can break the pact off, though in some cases it may require the agreement of the other party. Of course, to actually break an alliance, you don't need agreement, but to actually break a subject relationship, you may need an agreement if you are the junior partner. So far, so good. I think this system, after we explained Victoria 2 here, is significantly more advanced. It is significantly more detailed, and I think more granular. It takes a look at both your position, what sort of great power you are, what you can afford, what the internal situation is, do the landowners support you or not, and it takes a look at the different options of actions, whether it is ongoing, instant, or pacts, or between two factions, and then influences how much you actually pay for that in the influence section. So I think this is much, much more interesting than the diplomatic points in Victoria 2. Let's take a look at this. So this is an independent, basically one independent country to another independent country talking in diplomacy. Maybe it is Great Britain and Transvaal, if I'm not mistaken, here is in South Africa. Pardon me, South Africa, and we can begin improving relations, we can begin damaging relations, so these are ongoing actions. Then expel diplomat is, one and only action. Take on debt sounds like on an instantaneous action as well. Violate sovereignty, oh, this one is a really good one. We're going to see that in detail in a second. Ask to become dominion, I assume this means they become our dominion. Great Britain otherwise wouldn't ask them, right? But who knows? They would agree to that, actually, interestingly enough. Form alliance, propose trade agreement, invite to customs union, and join customs union. Both of these, or all of these, I should say, would of course create pacts. So all of these are pacts. This is a pact. But these here are, these here are equal. And maybe these are equal, but I don't think they are equal. I think they're still a top-down relationship. Violate sovereignty. Yeah, you don't need really approval. I think you can just kind of do that. But either way. Let's take a look at different actions that we have. Please note that, as always, the game is still under active development, so what's in here may not exactly match what we have for release. Yeah, makes sense. Instant actions, and not an exhaustive list. Let's take a look at it. Expel diplomats. This is an action that immediately lowers relations with a target country, stops any ongoing attempts by them to improve relations with you, and blocks further improved relations attempts for a period of 5 years. I can't read anymore. Using expel diplomats also gives the acting country some infamy and prevents them from using expel diplomats on the same country for 5 years. Now, I will say, obviously, it should stop you from expelling diplomats for 5 years, because ultimately, hey, they're already expelled, what are you going to do about it? But this is just a cooldown period, because this is active for 5 years as it stands. This is an instant action. You do it, they can't at any point, increase relations anymore, at least for the next 5 years, and it will immediately also lower relations. We can see this right here. This is Russia's unexpected attempt to build stronger relations with the Ottomans is not being received well at the Sublime Porte. When enacted, Ottoman relations towards Russia deteriorate by 30. That is significant if we have a scale from minus 100 to 100. Ottoman expels the diplomats of Russia, preventing all improving of relations for 5 years, and infamy increased by 100. Very, very interesting. I will say, I'm curious whether Russia has any answer to this. Whether there's a casus belli, for example, whether, maybe they are able to gain other alleyways into the Ottomans here. It's interesting, because right now this seems like an absolute thing. If you want worse relationships, this is how you get them guaranteed, and the opposing side can't do anything about it. But to be fair, if you do this, this is a pretty extreme step anyway. Now, take on debt. This is an action that allows one country to take on the debt of another in exchange for being owed an obligation. More on this in later dev diaries. I assume they are basically favors, and, if you want something from them and you have an obligation, then they potentially have to say yes or face, for example, infamy. Redeem obligation. This is an action that forgives an obligation owed to the acting country in exchange for a large boost in relations. Yeah, again, if you forgive a hook, for example, in CK3, if you forgive somebody, then they will say, I like that, but alternatively, you could also blackmail them. Really cool, though, that we have this option. This is clearly an expanded system. And also, I do want to mention, I sort of glossed over that, but take on debt is pretty good. Take on debt is pretty interesting. Now, we had something similar, of course, or actually I think we had literally this concept basically in Victoria 2, but I like this idea a lot. Take on debt is one of those things that with a new market system, maybe you want to do this sometimes to stabilize a country that you need for your supply, or otherwise your economy will also collapse. Very cool idea. Violate sovereignty. Now here we go. Hey, listen, I already know the memes and the comments. I'm going to say it before you can write it, okay? Oh, the German interested in violating sovereignty? Oh, this is a classic Belgium moment. Listen, I know, okay? This is an action that allows the acting country to violate the neutrality of another country through whom they need military access, creating a diplomatic incident and potentially bringing new countries into the conflict. Great Britain. We'll go more into under what conditions you can use this and exactly how it works at a later time. I am super excited for this. This is something that literally has not existed in any game. In any game Paradox has made. Super excited for it. Super excited for this. I'm thinking about it. I cannot think of a single game. I know Knights of Honor does this. In Knights of Honor, you can march through somebody else's territory and they will send you a letter, and that letter says, hey, screw you, buddy. And then you can say, hey, screw you back. But yeah, basically, this is new. I'm a huge fan. Era appropriate, if you will, and I think this should give a lot more options when it comes to protecting countries, because you don't necessarily have to go to war. Maybe you can just send a stern letter, or maybe you want to defend Belgium until the last man. Now, ongoing actions, not necessarily an exhaustive list. Improve relations. This is an ongoing action that slowly raises relations up to a maximum value of 50 out of 100. Costs influence to maintain, with the cost increasing if the target has a high rank, and it is the exact opposite in terms of the relation change for damage relations, but the rest is the same. Basically, the cost of influence increases the higher the rank of another nation. Then we have bankroll. This is an ongoing action where one country pays a part of its monetary income to another each week as direct subsidies to their state treasury. This is, for grand strategy games, I think a very well-known mechanic. I personally like it a lot, though, because now it actually costs influence. You may want to do this, but you're looking at a situation where you could be spending this influence and not just the money on a different country. Right here, we have apparently a historical case. The contest between Siam and Dainam for control of Cambodia led to a long-standing regional rivalry that sparked several wars in the early 19th century. Siam are actively damaging the relations with Dainam, of course. You can see that we are currently at 0%, plus 10% per day, and will result in mutual relations changing by -1 on 11th January 1836. So every 10 days, we lose one opinion until we reach -50 with them. You can also see that the numbers now are correct. In the earlier one, they weren't exactly correct, but now they are. So in the early devs there we saw France and Hungary, and now the numbers are completely correct. So again, never really worry about these numbers, they are bound to change. Then we have non-subject pacts, not necessarily an exhaustive list, as always. Alliance, this is a diplomatic pact that allows two countries to help each other when attacked in diplomatic plays, even if they do not have an interest in the relevant area. More on this next week, very interesting. Costs influence to maintain, with the cost increasing if the other part has a high rank. This is interesting, because basically what it states is, if you do have an interest in another area, and somebody in that area gets attacked, you may get a choice about getting involved. What that would entail, what that would cost, and what that would enable you to do, I'm not certain. But I like this idea. Alliances basically just say it's a global thing, whereas strategic interest means if something happens here, I may come to your aid. I may. You know, it's much more conditionally, I guess. I like this a lot. I really am looking forward to basically using these alliances. What I'm interested in when it comes to alliances, in which they haven't elaborated on, is the question of how significant will the hard-coded lines be. For example, maximum alliances of great powers, maximum alliances of unrecognized powers and whatnot, right? Obviously, influence is a very dynamic measure that Victoria 2 didn't have at all. Does that mean Russia can be allied to more than one, more than two, more than three great powers? Let's find out. That is an interesting point to me, because that is a big balancing factor. Obviously, the AI will have, you know, certain preferences, but with alliances allowing you to come to wars, but with interests also allowing you to do this, this has become much more multifaceted than it ever was in Victoria 2. Here we have the customs union. This is a diplomatic pact where there's a senior and a junior partner, much like I said upstairs or above, and makes the junior partner part of the senior partner's national market instead of having their own market. Costs influence to maintain for the senior partner one only, with the cost increasing if the other partner has a high rank. Makes sense. Trade agreement. This is a diplomatic pact which gives both countries competitive advantages when establishing trade routes in the market of the other country. Costs influence to maintain, with the cost increasing if the other part has a high rank. This one is really interesting. There's a lot here, and I don't want to keep you too long on this particular topic, but we have an actual screenshot here as well. A trade agreement between Russia and Prussia would let the latter tap even more deeply into the former's timber exports and improve Russia's access to German-made tools. Trade agreement, maintenance cost 100 influence, creates a trade agreement. If they accept, Russia relations also increase. You can also say over favor, which means that they would be more likely to accept this, which in turn they could then use against you if they wanted something from you. What interests me here so much is the question of how it really works. What they talk about is, you can have a trade agreement and then still need to set up trade routes. Meaning, the trade routes are for very specific products, we already know this, and the trade agreement does something that benefits this. I wonder how it works. Does this A, make it so that you gain a competitive advantage in buying things from their market? Or does it B, maybe make it so that, honestly, I don't know, maybe make it so that you can just purchase things for cheaper from their market? I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I'm not entirely certain. Does it make it so that you can have more trade routes with them? Does it make it so that each trade route is just more efficient, that they can transport more goods? Because of course there's a sort of bottleneck there. How many ships do you have? Does it potentially make it so that tariffs are ignored? Because there are multiple layers here. Let's talk about this. You as a country can set tariffs and taxes on, well, tariffs are taxes, can set tariffs on specific goods. If you have a trade agreement, does that agreement void those tariffs? Does it void all tariffs? I am really eager, seriously, really eager to find out the actual sophisticated nature of this, because right now we have a vague overview. It makes it easier to run trade routes, makes it more effective, whatever that may mean, a competitive advantage, as they say. But I really wonder what that means, because if you look at real-life trade routes or real-life trade agreements, you're looking at highly complex topics. There are certain sectors, there are certain trade goods that are exempt from tariffs now and others aren't, you know, that sort of stuff. There are very few regions in the world that are so all-encompassing that there are no tariffs on anything. So a trade agreement, does it just sort of go around tariffs? How does that work? There are so many questions, seriously, that I have on this topic. I cannot wait for them to go into trade agreement detail. Let me know what you think, what this might mean. What can a trade agreement do for your trade route that would qualify as a competitive advantage? I would be eager to hear your thoughts. Now, subject pacts, and there are basically within subject pacts, there appear to be three categories. There appears to be a category between a non-colonial there appear to be non-colonial subject relationships, colonial subject relationships, and then subject relationships for an unrecognized power. So the top two, so non-colonial and colonial, are only for recognized powers, and then unrecognized powers are in the other sector. Let's take a look at this. Protectorates are non-colonial subject relationships. Subject is very autonomous. The only restriction placed on them being that they are not able to have a fully independent foreign policy, can be turned into a puppet by their overlord through a diplomatic place. So it starts with protectorates. For example, hey, I don't know, Prussia says, Belgium, you are now my protectorate. Then we have puppets. This is a type of non-colonial subject relationship. The subject has no diplomatic autonomy, pays part of the income to their overlord, and is part of the overlord's national market. It can be annexed by their overlord through a diplomatic play. Basically, hey, I'm Prussia, Belgium becomes a protectorate, then a while after, Belgium becomes a puppet, then a while after, Belgium gets annexed. This is something that I personally like a lot, because for example, Imperator Rome, is something, I think EU4 does this as well, that frustrates me a lot, because there are subject relations that just say they will forever be a subject. Victoria 2 did this as well. It really is, it's so sucky, but they basically do this as well. And it really sucks, because maybe right now you don't want to annex them, but maybe later on you do. And this is basically what this looks like. You know, protectorate, then to puppet, then to annexation. On a colonial level, we have dominion. Basically, subject has extensive diplomatic autonomy and can have their own subjects, though they're still required to be part of their overlord's market. It can be turned into a territory by their overlord through a diplomatic play. And then territory, this is a type of colonial subject relationship. The subject has limited diplomatic autonomy, pays part of their income to their overlord, and is part of the overlord's national market. It can be annexed by their overlord through a diplomatic play. Basically the same thing, where it says you have a loose relationship, you have a strong relationship, and you annex them. The difference here is that on the colonial level, you're looking at something where they will always be a part of your market, and I think this is big. Colonial relationships in this time period fundamentally exist because you require access to their goods, to their resources. You want to exploit them. It's terrible, but it is how it went. And I think that this is a really interesting relationship here. Again, you start with the non-annexable, and then you can progress into the annexable territory type. And then we have tributaries. This is a special subject relationship only available to unrecognized powers. The subject has extensive diplomatic autonomy and can have their own subjects, though they're required to pay part of their income to their overlord. They can be turned into a vassal by their overlord through a diplomatic play. Vassals. This is a special subject relationship only available to unrecognized powers, yet again. The subject has no diplomatic autonomy, pays part of their income to their overlord, and is part of the overlord's national market. They can be annexed by their overlord through a diplomatic play. I really like this. What I am interested about is the question of, do they transfer one-to-one if you become from unrecognized to recognized? For example, if you are unrecognized and you have a vassal that is also unrecognized and you become recognized, does it become a colonial relationship? Is it a legacy vassal relationship? I have so many questions. I would love to know that, but yeah, not explained here either. I hope that maybe in the dev responses there is something about that in there. As you can see right here, Afghanistan has no intention of becoming a Persian tributary peacefully, and Persia will have to resort to a threat of force if they intend to press the matter further. Maintenance cost is basically 50. Afghanistan will be a part of the customs union led by Persia, creates a tributary subject relation between Persia and Afghanistan. You can see right here, Persia and Afghanistan are of course unrecognized, and you would Afghanistan would be transferring 0.93k, so $930 every week to Persia. Now they would not accept it, but you can confirm it, and I have to assume that this gives you a casus belli. This is a diplomatic incident, if I've ever seen one, probably generates infamy, and then makes it so that you're looking at a situation where, you know, you get the casus belli if they refuse. Very cool, if that is the case, but I would like to know more going forward. The system itself is built to be completely moddable up to and including adding new forms of subjects or entirely new pacts with completely custom effects. Very cool. Check back next week as we talk about diplomatic plays and how they will let you shatter those limits. I thought this was a great dev diary. I personally believe that the advance, as I laid it out as well, this is why I mentioned the influence capacity, this is why I mentioned Victoria 2 with diplomatic points and so on. I believe Victoria 2 is completely, it's just so bad on a diplomatic level. On the actual interactions that you can have, it is fairly primitive, it is very direct, where it just says, hey, it all costs 1 diplomatic point. Diplomatic points can't really be addressed. What they do is incredibly, you know, sort of isolated. You have to do this, it is either successful or it isn't successful. Victoria 3 seems to have a much more diverse point of view here, where you take a look at something. Not only do you have different types, not only do we have different subject types, you also have a situation where you can request something, and even if it is rejected, you can then go in and be aggressive about it. This is a big step forward, bringing Victoria from the 2010s to the 2020s. At least that's how I see it. Now, this was this dev diary. Let me know what you think about it. Let me know whether you were missing any diplomatic actions. And now let's take a look at the exciting topic of the last monthly update. Right, so basically here we are. This is the first image. We have 38 images. Not all will spend or will have us spend that much time on them. English migration. Large number of English people have begun migrating to our state of Thrace and its surrounding states. I have to assume, hey, maybe they got rid of the king and, you know, the population says we hate that. Maybe Greece conquered Thrace and now the English say, hey, we were there once before in 1204. Maybe we should be back. And, you know, that is why they're migrating. Obviously, it looks odd, but this is a really cool case of looking at this and saying, wait a minute, we have a flexible migration system now. I'm super excited for this one. Victoria 2's was very lackluster, beyond the very basics, which were definitely functional, but this one looks much more flexible. So in case England goes into the gutter and doesn't become a world empire, this is what will happen. Everybody will run to Thrace, whether it's under the Ottomans or under Greece. Right here, we're seeing a state population. You can see it, in the projected growth and the projected migration. The migration attraction of this, which is California, is high, and you can not see why actually here, but you're going to see it in another screenshot. You can see where the migrants came from, what the average migration attraction is and whatnot. You can also see what the general standard of living is, and secure is pretty good. The rich ones appear to be starving. The poor are, and the middle stand, or the middle class, are secure. I would argue, basically, maybe there are no rich in California. It's a good question, because they must all be unemployed to have a state of 0 for this. Now you can see turmoil currently 0.0%. Maybe it's going to increase. We also have a good fertility rate. We look good. We look pretty good, don't we? I have to assume the rich are just all unemployed. There are only 139 unemployed people of a population of 140,000. I just assume there are no rich, honestly, in California. It's maybe, this sort of start of a migration state where, only the poor come in, and only once the poor have settled, the rich will come with investments. Now, this is an interesting map. I want to highlight this primarily because there are two things that I want to highlight here. First of all, I love the specific borders that we have here. Upper Canada, Dakota, Lakota, the Iron Confederacy right there, the Indian Territories, the Comanche, the Navajo. Seriously, I will mispronounce all of these, my apologies. The Nez Perce, I actually do not know that tribe, my apologies. But basically, what I find very, very interesting here is that this map and all other maps that you are going to see here in today's monthly update are all state-based. Now, this isn't a surprise, but I really want to highlight this in case there's somebody out there that thinks it will always be broken down to provinces. Maybe if you zoom in closer, but I kind of doubt it. Either way, this is state, region-based, or rather, it's actually state-based. Now I look at this. Yeah, look at this. This is a state. The entire state region is, of course, this. What we can see here is Mexico and the US and all of the tribes, of course, in 1836. And then we can see the migration attraction for California. We're running a greener grass campaign there, meaning that is an edict. No, that is a decree. My apologies. And then we have sparsely populated. There's just not many people in California compared to the arable land. And that makes it very, very, very attractive. If we look on the other page, this is Nevada. Nevada seems to be very unhappy. This is minus 50% from turmoil. Who knows what happened there? Meaning that the Nevada migration attraction is very, very low. And this might mean that they're sending out immigrants. Let me actually check Nevada. We got anybody here? Nobody from Nevada. Interesting. Okay, maybe in the future. But they are very unhappy. Now, I assume Nevada is probably also pretty empty. But to be fair, Nevada doesn't have much arable land. What is also interesting here yet again... Yeah, look at this, actually. I'm interested in this. I'm so fascinated by this particular one. I don't think anybody wrote something last time that I talked about this, but you can see it right here. This looks like basically a trade node. This is where these sort of supply lines end, right? And this one isn't lit up. Right down here, we have a golden one. You see this? It's a golden one. I am still of the opinion that this basically means where we have supremacy. And maybe Mexico, if we are Mexico here, just isn't very active at all, basically, on the topic of the seas. Maybe. Who knows? Let's progress. What we see right here, I can already tell you, quite frankly, I think for me personally, Cloud will be the most interesting graph of any graphs in this game. Because I'm looking at this right now and I'm like, what happened to the industrialists? I think orange is industrialists. What happened to the intellectuals? How did they rise like this, right? I am so eager to overanalyze this like crazy. What you can see right here is that we have various topics currently enacting. We are currently enacting the universal suffrage, which is it seems to be a hot topic. It will take some time to implement that. There are also laws that either have governmental or movement support. So the movements are right here. Suffrage, universal suffrage, is one of the ones that have popular support. And they also have labor union and intellectual support, which is why we have the chance to actually pass it here. Then we have wealth voting, which currently is not being passed. And yeah, people are very radical. People feel very unhappy about this. I assume they feel very unhappy about it, and you can see it right here as well. This is a preservation movement. They're very unhappy about it because currently we're getting rid of wealth voting. So the people that like wealth voting say, screw you, I'm gonna bomb you if necessary. And I think this is a really interesting dynamic that we see here directly. We have two political movements and they're directly related to each other. Universal suffrage is being passed, and because of that, wealth voting is supposed to be preserved. The industrialists are of that opinion. And that's actually interesting. No, I think we started doing this later. We only did 1.2%. And this was like 1837 when the industrialists started dropping. But look at that, they're on the losing side. They are on the side of people that are against this. But basically, yeah, the wealth, the richie, The rich, they would like you to not give everybody universal suffrage. Very, very interesting. You can track much, much better than in Victoria 2 why and who and how people are and for and against something. Very, very cool. I'm a huge fan of this. I will say the screen, I mean, honestly, there's a lot of like wasted space in these. I will always bring that up. It's like you could cut this down into like a tiny screen basically, right? And have the same amount of information. But who knows? UI is difficult. I'll tell you straight up, UI is very difficult. Right here, we have political movements. Enact poor laws. Okay. You have pop support. You have political movement support. Right. Oh, that's actually really interesting. Let's read this. Support the political movement because they belong to an interest group that approves of enacting poor laws. Now, you don't need to, belong to an interest group that just feels that way. No. If you are in an interest group that doesn't support it, you can still support it if you think it will be good for you. If it improves your status or wealth, you will be happy. You can also see we got a bunch of radicals there. And I'm not sure whether we're passing it, but the other one here is interesting. Restore racial segregation. We're going to see that in a second. Here's another one. From total cloud of angry supporting interest group plus 64% radicalism of national supremacy, which I have to assume is maybe a residency law. Supported by 5k radicals, and they will increase, I believe. Oh no, actually, this is just the actual movement. So these are just pops, and this is just the interest group. The interest group here adds a huge amount of radicalism. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's insane. None of these interest groups are radical, it seems. If you go on and basically make this interest group happy, national supremacy all of a sudden wouldn't really be a difficulty anymore for you. I like this. Seriously, this is a great approach. You can either go for the pops or you can go for the interest group. Now, next up, and we can see it right here, racial segregation. Restoring it means this law was altered and was gotten rid of. And now they want it back. 1.09 million people support this. Radicalism is high with 64%. Your intellectuals want racial segregation to be restored. This is insane. This is very strong. This is a lot of people, right? A lot of people being against this. That's just, how they are here. I think we are... I'm thinking this through. We are either looking at one of the Dutch colonies, I want to say. Or maybe we're looking at the US, actually. Honestly, I'm not sure. I would say that we're looking at the Dutch colonies or we're looking at the Netherlands, and you basically got rid of racial segregation. I don't know whether they ever had racial segregation, so I might just be wrong there. But Cornelius Vanderbilt sounds like a historical person. You know what? Let me Google this. Okay, this was actually hilarious. I looked him up, and I was like, hey, I know this guy from Victoria too. I'm pretty sure he's on one of the technologies there. But anyway, what is important here is Cornelius Vanderbilt is actually American, meaning we are looking at the industrialists. And this is America. In 1838, the player got rid of racial segregation, and people are mad as hell. This is how you get an early civil war. A very early civil war. Now, the industrialists currently aren't happy. Let's take a look at why. The total approval of +5 is due to industrialists approve of presidential republic, elected bureaucrats, mercantilism, no income tax. They do not like public schools. They like no health system, and they like child labor allowed. This will radicalize the industrialists. That's the law being changed here, I assume, yeah? Industrialists disapprove of change from no migration control to migration controls -10, from -5 to -15. Yeah, that's pretty intense. They will really dislike you there and become, of course, radicalized. Other factors, they are currently in the opposition. They have 40% of political strength in the interest group is loyalist, and 15% of political strength in the interest group is radical, meaning how the pops feel in an interest group, even if the interest group feels differently, will influence how ultimately the interest group feels about you as well. Really, really interesting. You can see here, I'm pretty sure, that this drop comes from getting rid of racial segregation. I'm pretty sure anyway. That's insane. That's a really interesting situation. I would love to learn more about this situation, because this smells like Civil War territory right here. Seriously, it smells like Civil War territory. And it looks like, if you look at this, wait, let me actually check this, right? We had a pop support, and then we had the radicals with 64% national supremacy. It's a different screen, that sucks. But the clouds of angry interest groups seems to give a pretty big amount here, right? And the industrialists currently are at 5.9%. Who knows how much they actually are of this and how much are radicalized pops, because that's an insane amount of radicalized pops. Super, super interesting. We have a huge degree of radicals, I have to assume. Workforce of 5.09 million. Maybe it's America, maybe not, but yeah, that you don't want to see this graph this early in the game. I love this so much. This is so neat. I love this so much. Right here, we have some trade unions. They are abolitionist, they're proletarian, egalitarian, populist, but their leader is bigoted and an experienced diplomat. Really, really interesting to see the leader lead this particular trade union right here. Stands on slavery. Obviously, they dislike slavery and whatnot. They prefer labor rights. They do not like serfdom and so on and so forth. They will, long term, at least this is how they explained it, they may change their ideologies and make it so that they are then very positive towards workers' protections, regulatory bodies, and serfdom abolished. But currently, this doesn't really play a role. Currently, in their current state of affairs, they are obviously looking at slavery and of serfdom. If this is Brazil, many people pointed out that Brazil has a very interesting history related to slavery, especially in this time period. So very, very cool how that would play out, with the trade unions in Brazil. Mario Fragoso is an abolitionist, so he definitely, he's putting this trait in. By default, the trade unions are not abolitionists in Brazil. They're proletarian, egalitarian, and populist, and then he comes in and adds the abolitionist trait, and of course, bigotry and being an experienced diplomat. Now, this one is an interesting one. Paranoid slave owners. That's a journal entry. The unrest that originally triggered the paranoia appears to have settled down somewhat, but the fears of a revolt persists. And then later on, so this is like Twitter. Basically, on the bottom is what came first, and then what's up there is, the newest news. A low but noticeable level of turmoil among slaves in some states has caused slaveholders to grow increasingly concerned about possible slave revolts. There you go. Very interesting. I would like to know what this actually means, like where this comes from, because obviously, yeah, this is similar to newspapers, except more usable, probably anyway. Newspapers were very useless, but basically, I would really, wonder how often are you going to look at this. Very interested in that feature, nonetheless. Sugar plantations, this is pretty straightforward. You can see these slaves are being used, they're politically inactive, they get this guaranteed struggling level of the, social welfare, and that's about it. They basically come in where, laborers would be. You can also see it again, yeah, right here. Sugar plantations in Rio de Janeiro. You can see what their production methods are and whatnot. Honestly, not too interesting, this one right here. First of all, this is an interesting map. Honestly, I don't see anything that really throws me off. This state is currently importing slaves from Lega, so this is a slave trade state. They are able to actually trade slaves in, basically. Or is this just a legacy state? It could be a legacy state. I'm honestly not certain. Don't want to bet on this, but they are importing from Lega anyway, meaning that people that have... no, this is definitely slave trade. People that are going into debt slavery are then popping up here as new slaves in the Moluccas. Slaves right here, treated not as a person but as property, performing forced labor in various sectors. In countries where slavery is permitted due to their status, they are not allowed to participate in politics. Slaves are part of the lower strata. Certain buildings employ slaves in order to replace another pop type. Nothing too surprising here. We have 1.09 million slaves in Brazil, and the slaves, if they were politically active, currently they have political strength 0, they would support the devout, landowners, rural folk, and the armed forces. Landowners... Now that's irony. That's irony. You can see right here, we currently have the legacy slavery law. Slave trade is not ours. Debt slavery isn't ours, but we could enact those. There's some pushback against debt slavery. Slave trade, people are generally fans of, it seems. And slavery banned, people also not really fans. You can see the devout are against slavery. Very interesting, of course. There was a lot of religious pushback against slavery, I think, in basically all of the Americas at the time. Very eager to test this out. But again, here we'll say, there's a lot of space. That's a lot of space, I will always say that these images, honestly, this will add so much to the actual gameplay. I'm very, very excited to see pops through and through in the world. And I'm actually excited for this monthly update because there are some pops with some clothes that we haven't seen before. And there seems to be more variety than I assumed. Now you can see slaves, Afro-Brazilian, Catholic slaves pop in coffee plantations in Bahia, which is that Mexico? Bahia? Honestly, I'm not certain. I don't want to bet on it. Maybe it's Brazil. Yeah, Brazilian. Okay, I'm an idiot. Afro-Brazilian. There you go. Now, this one's standard of living. You can also see this is per state. I want to highlight that. This is per state, not per province or anything. You can also see, and this is interesting, this is the Ottoman Empire. And I'll be honest with you, I think this means we have like some sort of supply route going on wherever there's a golden note. Nothing in the blue notes. Maybe this means they're accessible, but we're not using them currently. Very, very interesting. This could also be how you transport troops, for example. If you say, I, as the Ottomans, want to be active in America, you need to be able to maintain this route to get troops into a location. I could see that. I would be very interested in that. Either way, standard of living in the Ottoman Empire, the lower strata is struggling, the middle strata is secure, and the upper strata is prosperous. Very good for you. Those factors are affecting the standard of living. For example, transportation. This is, quite high, very expensive, but the standard of living, I mean, only, just a couple of days have passed. they're gonna do fine, right? The Ottomans surely won't be the sick man of Europe. I see a lot of people also complaining about the borders here, and I saw a post just today about this. And this might be true. I think the map in itself definitely has issues in a number of places, I would say, yeah. Standard of living in Mexico, we have struggling, middling, secure. You can see standard of living is doing quite well. It's actually rising over 3 years. You know, it's going up and up and up, and that you love to see that. You can see the California, whatever this is, Colorado. No, Colorado is like here, I think. Whatever this is, okay? And then Western Mexico. Yeah, I got away with it. I just said Western Mexico. You can see it's all going up. Texas is doing very poorly, or well, South Texas. Very interesting to see that California is prospering like this. That's quite crazy, honestly. Services are expensive, transportation are expensive, and luxury furniture is expensive. I like this a lot because this will let you know what you need for your market to actually go on. This is an easy decision-making tool, and that's very important. You need easy decision-making tools if you then want to say, and now I will conquer Vietnam for their luxury furniture. If that were to be the case. I assume you would conquer maybe Brazil or make a trade deal with Brazil, you know, because they have the good wood, and then you would produce the furniture maybe at home. Right here, I love this so much. And let me see. Oh, okay. Bulgarian Orthodox engineers. Look at the flowers. Look at what he's doing here. Look at the different idol animations. Look at the clothing. This actually looks really good. I'm a big fan of what they're doing here. Population is increasing. It's a fairly small population. Workforce is 150, dependents 450. They're currently working in logging camps, and some have art jobs. Of course, these are the dependents, but most of the money comes in from the logging camps. I love this. And we can see right here are the needs. Don't worry about it. Nothing too interesting. Turkish Sunni clerks, very interesting. Population 12k, workforce 3k, dependents 9k. You can see right here, yearly births are higher than deaths, meaning this pop will grow, and you can see right here with plus 277. I love these outfits. I love the poses. Huge fan of this. Big fan of this. I think if you have as many professions as we have here, if you have as many wealth statuses, so standards of livings, as we have here, you need clothing to be like good quality, bad quality. You need a pose that indicates the job directly, or otherwise it's going to become way too difficult to understand what is going on. Also interesting, I like the map, visually speaking. Another standard of living, don't worry about it too much, doesn't matter. Here we have the virgin Greek Orthodox laborer versus the Chad Romanian Orthodox peasant. Look at them, how happy they are, how unique they look, what they're doing, what their poses are. I do think this looks a bit awkward maybe, but the pose is cool in itself. And then, I mean, what do you want me to say? I like this a lot. First of all, these are only 8 people, so this is like this is like 1/4 of the entire population. And this guy looks like at his wife as though he wanted to do unsavory things, very nasty things. And look at them. They're happy. Romanian Orthodox Chad peasants having a good time. I like this a lot. Obviously, they're unemployed here. That's why the Greeks are having such a tough time. Whereas, on the other hand, the Romanian Orthodox peasants are having a pretty okay time. They're still struggling, but they're, you know, a good struggling on a subsistence farm. Right here, Bedouin Sunni aristocrats, they're doing very well. Very rich. He got a nice staff. He's an aristocrat, of course. He says, hey, I do things. I like this. There's a lot of life in all of these characters. Look at them. Seriously, look at all these characters. There's so much life in them. They directly show how they're feeling, where they're looking, how they're doing, and so on and so forth, right? I really like this. I will say the hair is a bit off, but hey, listen, in development. Don't worry about it. New South Wales has discovery resources. That's not too interested. Yeah, you can discover gold. We talked about this. Very easy. This is the heritage location. So this is what a culture views as their homelands. You can see that Saratov, Samara, Kazan, and Crimea are viewed as the homelands, so these here, of the Tatar culture. You can see that most of them are peasants, or rather, I think many of them are peasants, many of them are laborers, maybe many of them are also something else. I can't really see it. Cultures of the same heritage. I assume this is like East European heritage, or maybe it's Turkic heritage. Honestly, I couldn't tell you. 67 cultures of the same heritage. That's a lot of cultures. There's so much about cultures that we don't know yet that I'm interested in. But honestly, I can't explain any of that. I just like this screen. I think this is a nice screen. Split states, who cares? Listen, this is all easy money. Yep. I will say Australia looks good if it wasn't for the repeating texture. This is a very clear case of a repeating texture, right? It's pretty okay everywhere else, but I mean, you know. But I like the expression, the eccentric nature of the textures that they have here. I think that generally is a good thing. Is there anything that we can see that is interesting? I don't think so, honestly. It's a huge infrastructure amount, man. These are states in India, in you know, China. This is one state region, for example, and these are all states. You can see this. So these thick lines are state regions, basically, and anything that is split, that is, you know, with a black sign right there. Why is Gujarat black here, I wonder? I really don't know. And where the hell do these green lines come from? Is that migration? Could that be... Oh my god, there's so much where I'm like, I don't know. Is that a military plan? We need to learn about these lines, man. I'm so eager to learn about them. What do you think? The blue ones and the golden, or, you know, the blue symbols, and what the green ones are? I just want to know, man. I really just want to know. But anyway, yeah, interesting. What I do want to say about states and state regions is that there aren't really more states, at least not on a significant level, in Victoria 3 compared to Victoria 2. I really want them to go into detail about how splitting states works, whether it works, and so on, because, like, if you can split them variably, then it doesn't matter. If you can't, then it kind of does. But yeah, no judgment until we see more of that. You can see all the states and state regions right here. Not that important to me. What we do know is, once you incorporate a state, they will no longer be unincorporatable. That is very important, just to point that out. Now, this puts us at the end of this. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Let me know what you think about any and all of this. And I'll see you later. Alligator.